Hello, my dear students and the rest of the learners. Welcome to part 11 of a 22-part series of tutorials in Managed Database System using Microsoft Access. In this tutorial, we are going to learn on how to set input masks and validation rules to control and regulate the type of data that is entered into our database. My name is MemJM, or you can simply call me Emily Swap. In order to control the kind of values that are keyed into a given field, it is always advisable to set some input masks and validation criteria. An input mask is used to pre-format a field to look or act in a certain way when a user inputs data. It enforces the format as user types. For example, when you are entering phone numbers and other special types of data. The input mask data can either be stored in a table or simply displayed and not stored. And therefore, it's always important also to set what we call the validation rules. Why? To ensure that the data that is stored in your fields meets the required criteria or conditions. A validation rule, just as I've said, ensures that data meets a certain condition. You can then create an input mask for each of your fields, either by typing directly on input mask and validation rule and the field properties section for each field, or by using the input mask build wizard, whose build button is displayed once you tap on the input mask line in the field properties section. To create an input mask for a field using the build wizard, you do the following. In the side view, you click in a field for which you would like to apply an input mask. Then in the field properties section, at the bottom of the screen, you click on the input mask line and notice the build button that appears at the right edge of the line. You click on build button to start the input mask wizard, as we are going to see. From there, you select the appropriate input mask and you click on next. For additional screens on which you can set options for the input masks, you click again on next. Finally, you click on finish on the last screen of the input mask wizard. Now the question is, how do we set input masks and why are they important? So, my dear students and the rest of the learners, it is important to note that input masks are very important because they regulate or control the data that we enter in specific fields to ensure that it adheres to the rules or the format that is required. The following are therefore some validations and input masks used in our tables. So for the student table, we retain the other properties, but then we add something for the input mask. You can see for the student ID, we have a certain format, like student ID. If you check on validation text, it is explaining what is required. Now, my dear students and the rest of the learners, it is important to note that if your fields will use certain input masks, it is always important to give some validation text to assist the person who is doing the entry to enter the right data, so that in the case the person keys in wrong data, a message pops up informing the user what he or she is required to enter. And therefore, if you want to enter, for example, the admission numbers of students being beginning with the S, followed by 3 numbers, then you set input mask as greater than, followed by letter capital L and 3 zeros. For example, at a validation rule, you can say like S with 3 hashes. For the first name, you can say validation rule is not null, so that it's not left empty. For the last name is not null. The date, you have it as you can see date of birth cannot be in the future, so it should be current, or mostly not even current but previous. As you can see, there is less than symbol equals to date. For the gender, validation rule is either male or female. For the phone, you ensure it is a number, and the format is that way. So it means that my phone numbers must begin with a 0, followed by 9 digits. Then we have the email. The format of email, for example, is junimenga@gmail.com. So it is star, like star at star.com. Star meaning any name, and at is mandatory, is a symbol, and dot or period is a symbol. For program ID, you can see it has a certain format. Program ID must start with the P, followed by 3 digits, like P001, and therefore the input mask is greater than L, then 00, meaning whatever you enter will be converted, and the first letter must be a P. And validation rule is like P with 3 hashes, as you can see. And therefore, we can set the validations and input mask for our table. So we open our database that we have already created and set our properties for. So we are going to open it. I'm opening where it is in my computer. You can search for yours from wherever it is. Then you open it. From there, we are going to open our table. Our table is students table. So we open our students table in the sign view that way. And then we retain the rest of the properties. The only thing we are interested with now is the input mask. So we go to the description for the properties there. Then under the input mask, we type the input mask that we need. For example, that way. That's our input mask. And then under validation rule, you can see validation rule here. You type validation rule like, then we have the double quotes S, then we can have our 3 hashes that way, and then we have our double quotes there. We can type the validation rule, but for now, I'll just skip that. You can key in yourself that later. We move on to first name. First name, we only need to put validation rule is not null. So you can just type this. And you can see, you can click here to get more information there if you want, or to build your validation rule or input mask. Or you can just type it directly, like is not null, meaning cannot be empty, is not null. So the question is it validation rule or validation text? It is validation rule. We can also do the same for the last name. Validation rule is not null. Date of birth. So we click on our date of birth, DOB. Then we go to validation rule. Is it validation rule or validation text? Validation rule. And then here we can see it is less this, because this is date. Validation rule is not less than date. And remember, you can always choose, but you can type that way. Then gender, so you click on gender. Validation rule is either or F. So we go to the validation rule. Validation rule, you click there, you type M or F. Let's see, if I click somewhere, you can see there's been, and then the double quotes automatically, M or F. Then we go to phone number. The phone number, our input mask, those ones should be, the input mask should be zeros. And how many? It should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like 0, 7, 1, 7, 1, 1, 1, 0, 5, 1. So those are around 10 zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you can have about 10 zeros there, around 10 zeros. Then the validation rule, it should be like, then you can have those double quotes there. We have 0, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those are 9. The first one should be 0. So like that. So the hashes are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's the 0 there. So that's the validation rule for the phone. What about email? For the email, the input mask none, but the validation rule is it should be star dot, that is star, not dot, but at, star at, star, that is asterisk dot, star. You can see once I click outside of the validation rule, it is, the like is added. That is like star at star dot star, that way. And then we go to program ID, the address, we can leave it. Then we go to the program ID. As you can see, it's not a must to set the input mask validation rule for a float in case it's not mandatory for you to control or regulate the entry. So for program ID, the input mask is supposed to be greater than, that way, L with how many zeros? 3. And then the validation rule. Validation rule is, it should be, let's type P. So it should begin with that P and the 3 hashes or 3 numbers that way. If I click outside that way, you can see how it looks. So it's always going to write it as like, it should be like that. So that's the validation rule for us. So that's all. That's all with the setting there. Input masks for our past table, and therefore we save our table. From there, we can move now on to our next table. And our next table that we are going to set the properties for, not the properties, but the input masks for, is the programs table. So we can close the students table. Then we open the programs table in the side view. We begin with the program ID. So how do we set the program ID? The input mask for that. So we go to input mask here. The input mask is the same as the one which we have already dealt with. greater than L with 3 zeros, and it's supposed to be the validation rule is, it should be like a program is, it should be in P with 3 zeros that way, or with 3 numbers that way. Next is the program name. The program name, we retain all the others as they are, but validation rule, we say is, you can say is not null, meaning it cannot be empty. That's validation rule. Then for the program fees, it should be greater than 0. So validation rule here, they should be more than 0. The rest, we leave them. Then we go to department ID. We can set the department ID. The input mask for the department ID is greater than symbol with 3 zeros, that is L, then with 3 zeros. And then the validation rule is like how it should be like every department should begin with letter D followed by these 3 numbers that way. So that is like the format for our department. And then you can type the validation text under the description as needed. So from there, we can save our table and we close it. Let's now move on to the courses table. For the courses table, we open the courses table in design view and then set our properties. That is our input masks and validation rule. So you click there under the input mask for the courses. You have, of course, greater than L as usual. And then we have our 3 zeros there. And then the validation rule is like what? That should be C for the course. So C followed by the 3 hashes that way. Then we move on to the course name. The course name, we only need to write validation rule is not null, meaning somebody must do some entry. Then we go to credit hours. Credit hours, what is the format of the credit hours? It's just validation rule that we are going to have, that it should be between 1 and 10. Just the validation rule between 1 and 10. Then we go to program ID. For program ID, we set the input mask just like the others. It is beginning with a number followed by these 3 digits there. Then the validation rule is like what? We begin with P, because we are talking about the program. P, then followed by the 3 numbers. That way, like that. And then we save this table for courses and we close it. Next is the enrollments table. So we open the enrollments table in design view, click on the data type there, and then set our properties or input masks. So the input mask for enrollment ID, we begin with is greater than symbol there. Then we have our usual format with 3 zeros. Then the validation rule is like Like now, enrollment should begin with letter E, and then with 3 numbers that way. I repeat, I have said validation rule is you write like, then you have that symbol there. We have E followed by 3 symbols that way. So that's a validation rule. Then we move on to student ID. Student ID input mask is that way. Then we have our 3 zeros there for the number. Then validation rule is like we have for student number, this is, remember this, my dear students and the rest of the learners, ensure you retain the format across the tables if the font is the same. Then we move on to the course ID. For the course ID, the input mask for the course ID is greater than symbol, then L. Remember, we are in the course ID. And then we have our 3 zeros there. And then validation rule is like what? Remember, these are the courses. So here, then from there, so we have set that. Then from there, we go to academic year. Academic year should be their validation rule made, the input mask none, but for validation rule, you can say it is between the year 2000 and here, that's the current year what? And date. Current year, date. That way, of course, plus 1. This is an equation from the year 2000 to today. There, that way. So you enter valid academic year simply from the year 2000 to today. Next is the term. The term, you just set the validation rule for the term. It's between 1 and 3. It can either be term 1, 2, or 3. And that's all. You save your table. Now you are being told cannot find font date. So that means there is an error on date here. So the term. So we go back to the term. The term is number. The term is number. Let's see, where do we have the date? It's academic year. So let's click on academic year. We see what it is telling us. So it's supposed to be between 2000 and here. So this one, we can set it properly. It is here. Date. It is here. Date. That way. Then plus 1. And then we also close this one that way. Good. Then we can now save our table. So we can now close the enrollment table. And then we set our next table, which is department. So we open the departments table in the sign view. Now for the departments, for the department ID, the input mask, for the department ID, the input mask will be L, and then department will be followed by three numbers that way. So the validation rule here, the validation rule is it should be like, so we said D, department should be with the letter D, followed by these three numbers that way. So the next is department name. So we click on department name, and then we just write validation rule is not null. It does not need any special input mask that way. Then we save and we close that table. Lastly, we set the payments table. The payments table. So we open the payments table in the sign view, and then we set our properties per each field. So we begin with the payment ID. So the payment ID, the input mask for the payment ID is greater. Then we have LL, then we have 3 zeros that way. Then validation rule, the validation rule here, it is like what? So it should begin with payment that way, PM, followed by 3 numbers that way. Next, so that simply means payment ID must start with 2 letters, PM, followed by at least 3 numbers. Then we move on to the payment student ID. The student ID input mask is greater. Then we have our usual letter, L, followed by 3 numbers, and then validation rule. The validation rule is student ID must start with the S, followed by 3 digits. So that means it is like it should begin with S, followed by 3 digits. That way. So that is the validation rule for the student ID. What about for payment date? For payment date, what is needed is the validation rule. And the validation rule is that the date, payment date cannot be in the future. So payment date cannot be in the future. So it will be the current date. So we can write it that way for the current date. Amount paid. The amount paid, the validation rule is simple. The value should be more than 0. What about payment mode? The payment mode here, the payment mode, we connote the validation rule. The payment mode is simple. It should be either in, it should be amongst any of the following. It should be amongst any of the following. Either cash, bank, cash, bank, or M-Pesa. They should be among those options. That's the validation rule. Either it should be cash, bank, or M-Pesa. So once we have done that, we can save that table and we close the table that way. So that's how we set. That's how we set our input masks. So we have set the input mask for the programs table also. And what we have seen is that the program ID must start with a P followed by 3 digits. For example, P001, and that's why the input mask is greater than L. Greater than L simply means that whichever character will be written there, it should be converted to uppercase, followed by 3 numbers. And to guide the computer in the format we need, we are telling it that the first letter should be P, followed by 3 numbers. So under the payment ID, the ID, you can see, it means whatever that is going to be typed should begin with D, followed by 3 digits. It should start with D. So that's how we have done that. Then we have also set the courses table, and the input mask, we have said it is greater than symbol, then L, then 003, meaning whatever digit that will be entered or should be converted to uppercase, and that digit should be formed by 3 characters or 3 numbers, and to guide the computer in knowing which letter should be the first one, which letter it begins with the C. So we have validation rule like C followed by 3 hashes for the number. So course ID must start with the C followed by 3 digits, e.g. C001. Then credit hours must be between 1 and 10. Then program ID is in that format. So it should begin with the P followed by 3 digits. Then we have set the enrollment table, where we have said that the enrollment ID should always begin with the letter E, followed by 3 digits, e.g. E001. For student ID, should begin with S and uppercase, followed by 3 digits, as you have seen. And therefore, the validation rule is as you can see. The same applies to course ID, and the first letter should begin with the C. So course ID must start with the C, followed by 3 digits. Remember, these are the formats based on how our data looks like. We are going to see how this data will look like in our part 13 of the series, and therefore, it's only that we are working from the structure first, but you have to know in advance the format. So if, for example, you know that every course is identified by letter C followed by 001, that's what should guide you. You know the input mask you need to include and the validation rule. And for the year, we'll see it is between the year 2000 and the current year, meaning that you should enter a valid academic year. And then the term must be between 1 and 3. We have also set the departments table, where we have said that department ID must start with the letter D, followed by 3 digits. And therefore, the validation rule is as you can see, and the input mask is as you can see. The name for the department must be there. That's why we are saying it is not null. Then, for the payments table, the payment ID must begin with PM. And therefore, it is supposed to be followed by 3 digits, like PM001. And therefore, the input mask is, you can see, greater than the symbol followed by 2 capital L's, meaning 2 numbers. And these numbers must, that is 2 letters of the alphabet. And these 2 letters must be converted to uppercase, followed by 3 numbers. And the format is like PM, followed by 3 numbers. Then student ID must start with the S, followed by 3 digits. We have already said about what that means, the validation rule there. And for the options, where you must choose an option amongst those which you are provided, you are supposed to provide those options under validation rule, like payment mode, either in cash, bank, or M-Pesa. That's how we do it. And therefore, with that, my dear students and the rest of the learners, we have come to the end of part 11 of the series. And therefore, you can continue to part 12 of the series, in which you are going to learn about linking tables or creating what we call relationships. And therefore, I want to congratulate you, my dear students and the rest of the learners, for being able to learn about this part of the series, or part 11 of the series, on or concerning the input masks and validation for fields in a relational database. You can access the rest of the parts in the series, as well as other computer or ICT videos, by clicking or tapping on Emily Swap ICT YouTube channel below this video. To subscribe to the channel, tap on subscribe button below this video in YouTube, if it's not currently reading or subscribed. For any further correspondence, kindly write to us through the email emilyswap@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening to me. Let's meet in part 12 of the series, and God bless.